I'm Adam. I just did a session about SASS as well. Previously, David is apparently not here, so they asked that me and Dustin kind of redo what we were doing, because our sessions were very similar. David's session was supposed to be a little bit more on Compass, but he's not here, so I pulled Dustin in to help me out, kind of do that. My previous presentation was about just SASS itself. So if anybody was here last time and you don't mind, hopefully you don't mind sitting through me again, going through the same stuff, that's fine, but I just want to let you guys know what's going on. So anyway, my name's Adam Varn. I run Hot Sauce Design and Development out of Tampa. My coworker Jason's here with me. We start out and we basically just do Drupal theming. I've been doing Drupal for about 4 years. I started out with just doing designs and stuff, and then moved into CSS and theming. And if you're looking for anybody to help with theming, we're certainly available for hire. So what I want to talk about today was SASS, which is essentially a better way of writing your CSS file, or writing your CSS for your themes. And it's not necessarily Drupal specific, but it is useful in Drupal. So what SASS stands for is Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. And SASS is a Ruby gem, so you can run it on, if you have a Mac, it automatically compiles on your Mac, or it's already on your Mac because Ruby's there. If you have Windows, you can install it through the Windows installer and run Ruby that way. But to install it, you basically just run gem install SASS from the terminal or command prompt, whatever. And then what that does is it basically installs the software on your computer, and you're able to start running SASS. Now, SASS has, what it basically does is it helps turn CSS, which is kind of a dumb language. It's just the only thing that it really does is just read down the page. It helps turn CSS into something more powerful. You can include variables, you can include files, you can reuse some of the same code, you can nest, you can nest your code so it's staggered and it's easier to read. And what it does is you do all these features and you write this code in the SASS files, and then SASS compiles it into regular CSS, which is what the browser reads. So the user doesn't see anything different. All they see is the CSS that's been written. And then what comes from that is basically so you have the CSS code that is written, and then you can go back to the SASS file and it makes your code a lot easier to use. I'm sorry, I might be repeating myself. I feel like I just did this. So,
how many people have used SASS and Compass already?
Okay.
Less than half.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of people are new to this, which is good. And there's something, you may have heard something similar to SASS, which is called less. Basically the biggest difference between the two is SASS it can be compiled locally on your system. So you'll write the SASS file, and then you'll save it. It'll compile with your compiler, which I'll show you in just a second. And then once it compiles, you get a CSS file that you put on your server, and that's what gets served to the website. Less runs differently. You actually write the less files, which they're very similar syntax and features. But you write the less files, and then those you actually put the less file on the server, and there's a JavaScript that you run that actually compiles it on the fly on the server. Now, the biggest difference between that, obviously, is if you have a highly trafficked site, the JavaScript has to compile all the time. So you're adding to your page request, it's going to be a little bit slower. I think there's a way to do less another way where you can do it locally, but you're still kind of basically in the same situation. SASS is becoming a lot more popular because it's easier to do locally. It gives you more flexibility, that sort of thing. In case anyone can't see it, the website for SASS is sass-lang.com. There's a lot of great tutorials and features here. This is just basically the installation page, but documentation, the API, all the sort of stuff that you would ever need to know about how to do this or that is on this site. So, like I said, you install it you install the Ruby thing, and so then it's running in your system. But to actually make it do something, you have to tell SASS to start watching certain files. So you would tell it to put wherever your CSS files are in. You would say sass-watch whatever the file is. Users, Adam/site/my-site/css/style.scss, and then you put a colon here for how you want to output what you want the file to be named. So it'll output that as it'll output style.scss into style.css. Now, if you don't like using the terminal, there's lots of really neat little programs out there that you can use. There's a free one for both Windows and Mac called Scout, which basically gives you a GUI interface to go through and start. You choose your site, and then you want it to navigate Drupal's file structure. So you tell it, okay, this is start the folder. It'll look for the CSS file, or the SCSS files in this folder. and then you can output it into a different folder. And you can do all this through the terminal itself, but this just kind of gives you an interface to do it. And then you just hit start here, and it'll say it's watching. So that when you make changes to a file, it'll start compiling. That's what happens. Basically, when SAS is running in the background, it compiles everything for you every time you hit save. So your style sheets are always up to date. Where a program that I use is called Live Reload. It's actually kind of neat because what it does is you can test. It'll watch the same. It'll do the same thing, monitor the files for changes and stuff. But you can actually install a browser plugin that'll You can actually watch a live site like Yahoo.com or something, and then you can edit a CSS file as long as the file names match whatever the dev site is, whatever the live site is. You can see the changes without actually reloading the page every time you make a CSS change. So it'll reload in the browser without you actually changing having to refresh every time. I think it's a neat little app, but that's just me. So SAS files are essentially .s, rather than a CSS file, it's a .scss file. And there's also a .sass file that you can do. And Dustin, do you want to talk the difference between the two?
Well, I actually don't know it that well. I use .sass. It's basically more indented and less braces, so it looks a little bit different than regular CSS. But I just like the nested approach to it. Is SCSS also nested?
Yeah.
So I mean, I actually don't know what the differences are, but
I think one of them has less brackets. You just open it, you don't have to close it or something.
Yeah, I think it's the .sass file.
And the syntax is different, like the way you do @include to include other.
Yeah, it's the same.
The same there.
Yeah. So clearly there's different ways that you can do it in the same.
Tobias, do you have any insight on that? Do you know the difference?
I don't know why it's different. I just like to say
There is a difference.
they're syntactically different, but not functionally different.
Yeah.
Okay, so they both compile the same. So if you prefer brackets, you can do SCSS. If you don't prefer brackets, you can do SASS. It's all going to function the same way.
SAS sacrifices a little bit of readability for a little bit of
Compression.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. So what these files essentially are is still just CSS files. And I'm just using the SCSS as an example, but I'm going to delete some of my examples that I was going to do. The first thing I want to talk about is the import feature. So this is something you can do in regular CSS, but it's useful in SAS too because you can reuse style sheets for other purposes. A lot of times on a site you'll just have one main style sheet that gets called, like style.css. With the import function, you can make a ton of as many different individual style sheets as you want and just import it into that one style sheet. So for instance, I have this. I'm sorry, I had to shut my computer down before I was told I was coming back in here. So for instance, I have all my fonts for this site in a separate file because rather than having them all in the one style file, it's easier to just keep it in. For me, it's easier to go back and change it, especially if you're going to be changing them a lot. So, for instance, I have all these, which normally, if you do CSS, you have the at font face to include an imported font, which is in this case the Open Sans font. So I have, normally you would have all of the font faces here at the top, whatever. But with SAS, you can just do import fonts, which is the name of that file. And the way that the file structure is named, you can, again, do it .scss or .sass, but you just put a underscore at the front of it, and then that's what tells SAS to look at those files specifically for including, for importing them in. So what this basically does is this will import all of the content of that file into my site, which is this little demo site that I built. So,
and the underscore forces it so that it doesn't compile with CSS.
Correct.
So you don't get like a font.css just
right. Right.
It's worth noting, be careful with your imports. If you decide that it's a good idea, hypothetically speaking, if you were to decide that it's a good idea to import every single thing into one style sheet, and it tops 256 kilobytes, IE8 will not load it at all.
Okay. What if it's compressed? If it tops that, okay.
If it winds up being 256 or better or more, then IE8 will just go, I don't know what to do with this, I give up.
I love Internet Explorer. It's like the 32 style sheet bug that is still, I believe, broken.
Because it's silently.
Yeah. It just
So
says
something happens, it's all wrong, I won't tell anybody.
yeah.
Still
So
30% of the browser share.
yeah, but the as you were saying, the imports, you basically just want to make sure you don't get too big of files that you're importing. Then you also have, you can also do things like variables in SAS. So for instance, on this site, like I took out all the A tags, so they're just the generic things right now. But you can write you can write as many variables as you want. I'm going to use these just for link colors. So for instance, I want a red link color for the A tag. So I'm just going to put A color, and then now I can, rather than putting in red or whatever the hexadecimal color is, I can just do link red and include it there. So for instance, if you have a color scheme that you need to use throughout the whole site in lots of different places, you can make variables, and rather than having to copy over a specific hexadecimal, you forgot the shade, especially if you're doing like the RGBA and you're doing the percentages and stuff like that, you can just make a variable and just call that one little variable wherever you need that color in the site, and it'll show up here. So I just made the links red, and then these have actually already been visited, so that brings me to my next thing, which in SAS you can also do nesting, and you can also nest pseudo classes. So when I say nesting, I mean basically you're including everything in this bracket. So what I'm saying is, rather than doing like a hover, a visited, and then you have to write all this extra code for each time, I can just go in here, include an and sign, hover, color, we'll say link orange, and then say visited, color, I don't have an extra color up here, so I'll make a new variable.
Do the variables work throughout the whole, all your CSS structure? Like, do you have to, where do you put your variables? Does it depend?
Wherever you want. I mean, yeah, it is like when it's compiling, it does have to be above whatever you're calling it. So usually you can either put your variables at the top, like you can't, like I can't put, I don't believe, and I'll say link blue, and I'll change this to, I don't think I can put this down here, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I guess my question is like, say that you're doing mobile theming and you do it on global, will also work on the
I can speak to
the
that.
normal size. Like, you don't have to rewrite the variable.
So
in
what you want to
CSS.
do is you want to create I create a variables SAS file. Or,
Mhm.
I define them all in one, and then I include that at the very top of all of those.
Okay.
And import that in. So that, and also like custom mixins. So you might want to create a whole bunch of little custom things that you're going to use throughout.
Haven't gotten to mixins yet.
What's that?
I said haven't gotten to
So,
mixins. Okay. no, but
just a little
yeah.
sneak peek to that. But so that's really, really handy to define that. You might want to also define, besides just colors, like maybe your font families. So I'll do like serif and pick my serif font family, and that'll be the name of that variable, and then sans for another variable to use sans font. So when I'm going through all my CSS, I can just be like, okay, I know header h1 equals, it's going to be sans.
Right.
And same thing with like vertical rhythm. If you want to do like your line height also, so you can say base line height, and that could be your variable, and other bases that you can use. And then, but there might be other spin-offs of that you want different line heights and different rhythms, so you can also add that. So you kind of define all that up front, kind of like your framework, and then when you're actually going through and building everything, you have all that just to use quickly. It's really neat.
Yeah, so to your original question, yes, you have to have them, I believe, up above before they're being called. So SAS will actually give you output of something that's broken, and I'll touch on that as well. But I had the blue link blue at the bottom, but now I just have to move it back up here to the top. I'll save it, and then that'll fix the problem. So now, why am I not?
Is live reload still running?
Sorry.
Live reload is running, right?
I think
So you
so.
should shut down and everything.
It does compile, I promise. I'm just trying to. Oh, wait, a hover. All right, let's take a look at the source code, see what's going on. Or not the source code. Oh no, it's Chrome because this isn't. It doesn't give me the hover state. is it color blue? I'll say. All right, there it is. So I was just calling blue and wondering why I was saying blue. So I'm calling these variables, and again, like he was saying, you can put in what you can make the variables and use them for, all sorts of things, and then just include them as an import file at the top. So you could say, at import variables. I can spell. And then you would have all your variables in there. The other thing that you can do too is use operators. So by operators, I mean doing some sort of a computation of certain things on the site. So for instance, say we want to make the background color not this white color. I want to make a shade of gray. So what I can do is do like lighten, or there's darken, and then you just feed in the color that you want. So. And then say I want to do 20% of whatever the black, whatever 20% of solid black is. So that will turn the background color to this. And then if I change it to 70%, it'll change it to a lighter color gray. And then you can get even more complicated with it. You can say include, do your link orange. So I want 70% of whatever that. Oh, orange is not a color. Never mind. I thought you could do that with
I
variable.
think you can try that again.
Oh, it's because it's not a hexadecimal, that's why.
Is that what that means? Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody know the
There's probably- I
hexadecimal
know
for
there's
orange?
a way to deal with that. There's a way to deal with that. Maybe you would define another variable called orange lightened and do that there, and then.
Well, I think it's because it's using the word, because I use the word for length instead of the
Oh, I see what you
hexadecimal. I don't know what the hexadecimal for orange is,
No, I
but
don't either.
we'll just call it 003300, whatever that is.
It's a mystery.
And then I didn't have anything there, so I'll just. So there we go. whatever that color is. So you can do. There's lots of different operators for this, and where it gets really neat is that you can do different. You can do different sort of functions. So you can I'll use their site as the SAS site as an example. You set your width of the nav bar as 800, and then you can say, I want to make the width of the nav bar to be 800 divided by the number of items, which is 5, minus 10 pixels. So then that'll spit out, make the width 150 pixels, because 800 divided by 5 minus 10 is 150. So you can do your variables, you can do the math and have it compute it all out and make it into this. So that makes it more flexible for mobile, because then you can make a mobile certain sizes. You can make certain things that'll scale. Basically, you can make it for different viewports or whatever you want to do. If you wanted to get into that, if you're not don't have other JavaScript or something doing the responsiveness. Let's see, mixins. So one of the coolest things I think about SAS are mixins. And a mixin is basically gives you like a chunk of code that you can reuse in different places. So for instance, if you use Drupal a lot, you look at, especially something like views. All right, I gotta get rid of that code, that's hideous. Views gives you a ton of CSS classes. They're, just to get to the view itself, you start with the block, the main block, and then the block inner, the block, then content, then view about, then view content, then views row, then the views field, then the view field content, then the A. So just to get to that one thing, you have to go through like 7 or 8 different classes. So that can get really tedious if you try to write your code and call as many classes as accurately as you can. So what you can do to save yourself from having to rewrite all that is you can for instance, say you have things on the site that you want all of these pages to be, things that you commonly use. Like you want all of your views that you have, for the news page and the about page and the board of directors, anything that you have a lot of, that you reuse the same sort of style for, you can make a mixin. And then a mixin is essentially just a certain group of variables that you just call, or a set group of CSS that you call with one line. So for instance, for this, I wanted all my rows to be the same width on this view. So I made this one mixin called views row, and then padding bottom I said is 20, margin bottom is 20 pixels, and then I made the border, we'll say 2 pixels, and then I did fuchsia because that was ugly. We'll say orange. So now, rather than on every single line of these that I want to call every single view, I don't have to retype all this out, copy and paste it, make this long, do all this same sort of stuff. I can just do include views row, and as long as the mixin's already been defined, which can be done at the top, or it can be done in your import file, it can be done, wherever. You can have a whole file of just these mixins of your commonly used things, which we'll get to with Compass. You can just do the include views row, and it'll change it here. So now I changed that, so now it's orange. And so everywhere that I want to use this style, I can change. I can put that in here for rows. Now I have like the odd row and I have the even row. But let's say I want to include that, but I also want to make the background color of the even rows is yellow, or green. I'm trying to do something that'll show up on the monitor. So now it still reads the same as what was in the mixin, which means the same padding, the same margin, the same border, and the odd row looks the same. But then I added to my CSS, so you can still do specific additions to the CSS as you go along. So if you have commonly used things, but it's slightly different with one or two things here, you can really make it a whole mixin. You can include the main mixin and then just kind of modify it as you need to. So the other thing is kind of getting into the nesting part of this, and this was a little bit about the classes I was just talking about. So this is just an Omega theme, because I just did something simple and quick to whip it out. The Omega gives you the front class, and actually a lot of themes give you the front class to start with. So normally you would do, say I wanted to get to this P, the P tag down here. It would be, front dot region content dot field name body P, and that would be your normal CSS class if you want to get to that specifically. With SAS, you can nest all of these. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to start with the front, and I'm going to put, now anything inside these brackets is going to be applied to the front page. So then I can say, okay, region content on the front page, and I can get to all my region content specific things here. And then I can say H1, which I don't think page title's in there, so I'll just say content. Now I'm calling the content, and then I say, field name body. I had this code from last time, so I'm rewriting it again. And now I'm calling the paragraph tag in here. So now, rather than having to write out each of these individually, front region content, then front region content, then front region content, field name body, then front, all of those sort of things specifically, you have this staggered stack that you can go through and put whatever you want in here for the size, for the styling. So what gets spit out here, if we actually look at this P tag, is what I just wrote in this nice, neat, CSS that the browser interprets, but it doesn't. But I've just nested it like here. So why this is important is because it can give you the ability. It's easy to go back and make changes later on. It's easier to read it, and you don't have to worry about making as many typos because you've got everything all enclosed into one chunk of code. And then of course, if you start moving in, I could just say let's make all my P's the include views row that I had down here. Which actually now I have to move this up to the top because I don't have it down there. That's probably a good idea to keep all your stuff at the top or in separate import files. So now I just included that mixin in here for the P file, and now they're all going to have the same styling as what I had before. Some of the limitations of this, SAS in terms of SAS is actually pretty good about debugging. If you leave off a colon, it'll give you, a bracket, it'll give you a problem. Now I'm using live reload, so this gives an error out here. In Scout, when I was doing that, it'll give it in the window, and if you're using terminal or something, it'll also give it in the window. So depending on what your program you're using to compile it, it'll give you a different output, but it'll still show the same sort of thing. Or it'll tell you what's wrong, so you basically go back and fix it. You can also, so that's good for the debugging side of things. In terms of how this is used in Drupal, a lot of different, Drupal just reads a regular CSS file. So you're still getting the CSS file that you can put out in your theme, and that'll be what's read. But overall. So you can really work outside of the theming system by writing the Sass files, and then just as long as your CSS files are there, the theme can still load it. Some of the base themes like Zen 5 and Omega 4, which is coming out soon, have support for Sass built into them. And by what I mean by support is they will compile it for you in the theme. And what we heard, what someone told me last session too, is actually that Zen has something for IE that you can turn off. It'll actually go through with your Sass files and compile it so that it'll fix anything that's broken for IE 6 and 7 automatically in there by adding the right classes that'll fix the issues. So it's basically compiling your CSS into something more useful. The biggest limitations to Sass is it's an all or nothing thing. And by that I mean when you start it, you have to commit to doing it to do everything in Sass, because you can't really go back to just CSS from there. So for instance, say you have a site and you're building it and you launch it for the client, and the client wants to go back and make changes. If they go back and change the CSS file, and then 6 months down the road you go back and change the Sass file, you're going to erase everything that was in their CSS file because they didn't compile it. So if you're working by yourself, it's easy to keep, to maintain it. If you're working from a group of people, if you have a team, then everybody on the team has to be working together, has to realize, okay, don't go back and edit the CSS file. But the problem really becomes with clients when you're trying to get them to, if they're tinkerers and they like to go in there and mess with their site, or they have a designer that they think is good about it, then they're going to go in there and mess with things, and you could have a problem of basically overwriting their code, and you would lose what was there because Sass doesn't go backwards. It doesn't keep what was already added. It just adds it just overwrites its own stuff. And as far as we're aware, there's not any way around that. But once you start doing it, and if you have a client who you're giving the site to, and you train them to, if you think they're going to really mess with stuff, and you train them how to use it, then it's not a big deal. So they just have to run a program and say, okay, hey, before you make your changes, just run this program, hit save, and put both files up there. If they, or if you're just going to maintain it to the point where you're just going to do little fixes here and there, you could just stop using Sass completely and just start editing the CSS file and say, okay, I'm done with Sass. That was just for development. Now we're just working off of production. Just edit that way. So that's really the biggest limitation and problem with it. Dustin had suggested another option, which is you can make a separate style sheet for them that's just a CSS file, and then they can put their own CSS in there. But that gets a little tricky, because then if they start overriding your CSS in their CSS file, and then you're doing it in your Sass file, and it just
it doesn't keep things together. So when you organize, it can be confusing. But it is a way to get some CSS in there.
Right. So it kind of depends on the client and the situation, but most of the time, I haven't really had a lot of experience where the client has wanted to go back and mess with my CSS after the fact. But
once you go Sass, I don't think you're gonna go back. It's
I mean, really, once you get into the
once you go Sass,
once you really start using it, and if you commit to making yourself, like for me, I just said, I keep hearing about this, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna start learning Sass, and I did it, and now it's like when I had to do this demo to write the CSS to just show what I was gonna change into Sass, I was like, this is such a pain in the ass. I don't want to sit here and keep typing this all out over and over again.
Yeah.
So if you do a lot of CSS and theming or anything at all, even not Drupal related, it really is a huge time saver, and you're like, why did I ever do it any other way? So, and Dustin, I guess, is just going to talk a little bit about Compass, which was also the other part of this session that Dave was going to talk about.
I'm not prepared, unfortunately. Can you pull up that?
Yeah, I got it. Can you guys see that, or I guess I can't really blow it up too much speed yet. Can anybody read that, or is it? Okay. So, Compass itself is it's compass-style.org, and Compass is essentially a open source CSS authoring framework. It works with Sass, and it includes variable. It basically gives you a lot of reusable patterns and things that you can run, that you can reuse on your sites over and over again. If you're doing a lot of different sites, or you can make gives you a whole group of stuff, but you can also tweak it to make your own and use it later on.
Oh yeah, sprites is sweet. So yeah, a lot of stuff we can just click on these links and
Sure.
go through them.
Thank you guys for bearing with us. Like I said, we were not expecting to do a session again.
Scroll down. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting is you can use Compass to go ahead and grab all of your sprites that you put into one directory, and it'll compile and spit out all the CSS for your sprites. So it makes it like extremely easy, and that's pretty much all the code that you would need to include. So that's the directory. You just do star.png, and anything with the .png in that directory is going to be used in the sprite that's compiled. So it spits out the code like this. So it automatically does all the positioning for you, that sort of thing. I wish I had examples of my own stuff, but I don't really have that.
So are you saying that you could have all of your files separated in a directory, and then you just run that script and it makes
And it actually
sprite
creates
file?
one, image, and it
It'll give
names
you
it
the
whatever.
CSS for
It
it.
needs to name it. Like it adds this, code.
Hash or something at the
Yeah,
end.
exactly. And then it takes care of it. It's really, so no need to do that stuff anymore.
Yeah, so if you have like a bunch of icons or something that you reuse, like Facebook, Twitter, all that sort of stuff, if you have one file, it'll turn it into one sprite file, and then you can do CSS, so it cuts down on your page loads, and
Yep. So that's
Most of
sprites.
what
are
the
just-
sprites are
yeah,
anyway.
Exactly. And then which makes making sprites easy. So let's go back and
Be careful with sprites in IE8 though. Since IE8 doesn't support background image size, it's really easy to get run over.
so far everything's worked fine for me. But I mean, there's always IE problems, and then they come up, and then that's life
swear
sucks
a
for
little
a
bit
few
at
days, and then then you get through it. So a bunch of helpful things here.
these are CSS3. It does a lot of general CSS3 things that are, just general properties for border radius, text shadow. You can give the example you were saying about border radius before.
Yeah, go ahead and click on border radius. And so instead of down a little bit further, maybe kinda. So
What are you looking for?
Go back up to the top, just to where we start.
Okay.
Not there.
Example.
Yes. So this is what.
Sorry. Did you want that?
You can set this, variable, default border radius, and then come down here. That's not making sense to me. Basically, I don't know.
Well, we're not
That's
gonna-
not what you want. Maybe I should
I
say.
say you can drive.
Makes a little bit more sense. Yeah.
Just to go back to the beginning, is this just a similar Ruby thing as?
Yes,
default?
Compass installs just like, and actually Compass will watch just like SAS does. It basically installs on top of SAS, so it'll. There's instructions on here on their website of how to install it and get it set up, but it does the same. It functions the same sort of way, but it's more powerful, and you don't have to run two at the same time.
I think I like NetTute's SAS Compass tutorial.
I think that's it.
If you want to take a note of this, that
Oh, but that's the Tunes Plus, or is it?
no, well, I guess it might be. That's NetTunes. So this should be able to give you everything you need to know to get started and all that kind of stuff. So I'd recommend this guide.
So yes, Compass has built-in grid systems, has built-in a lot of the stuff that we as designers and developers reuse all the time, but have other ways of doing it. This basically compiles it all into one big chunk that you can use or not use as much of as you want to. It's basically, since it runs in the background, you can import and include all of these files that you want included, or you can just leave them out. And if you have your own system, so it works with Drupal in the sense that you don't have to worry about, you don't have to include the grid system because your theme may already have it, or you could just include the grid system automatically if you're doing your own theme or if you're not working off a base theme, that sort of thing. So it gives you this flexibility of, it's like a toolkit, like, okay, here's your site, and then here's all these tools you can just include in here, and then you can tweak them and make them all work it'll save you the time of having to rewrite a lot of stuff. You just can override some defaults, and that's all you have to do. So it makes things a lot easier in that sense.
Yeah, so one of those things is like border radius. You could just type in border radius and put a value in there, and it'll actually spit out all like the WebKit, Firefox, and other browser support that needs. So you don't have to write and copy and paste all that. You just type one line and it takes care of that kind of stuff. Same thing with like box shadow. It's just a bunch of helpers that are super useful.
But again, you can run SAS without Compass. Compass does have to have SAS though. So just so you know, you have to it runs off of SAS. And there's other frameworks out there that build off of SAS. Bourbon is one that I know of. There's a lot of typography ones out there that are specific to SAS. So they're all just these import files and these mix-ins that make things easier for you to use. They give you things that you can call, and you don't have to write the code, so it just makes it a lot easier. Because they're written to be specific, just to be flexible. So even this one has, so basically has the Microsoft Transform one, for good old IE6.
This was the magic view source. That's what we were looking for. So now we got the actual source here. So we can call the mix-in opacity and give it a variable if we want, or we can put a fixed value in there, and it'll go ahead and basically does all of this for you and spits it back out.
So if you wanted to put, where would you put like the level of opacity there?
Where it says opacity, like here, where it says that, that's just a variable.
It
So
could be a
you
variable,
can put
or
a
just
20%, 100%, whatever you want to put in there.
Or 0.5.
Yeah.
So,
A number between 1 and 0, so 0.5. Or
yeah.
whatever. I'm done talking.
I was not prepared. So I have a whole bunch of stuff set up on my situation, and it's like, it almost becomes where it does so much work for me that I forget about all this, and it just,
You can do SVG gradient support.
yeah, the gradients are
I mean, you could we could do a whole session and probably a whole camp on SAS and Compass and all sorts of other things out there, because it really is. People just got tired of writing dumb CSS. It's like there's easier ways to do it, and so people have just figured out ways to do it. And I think that really anybody who really does spend a lot of time doing this sort of stuff, once you really get into it, you're gonna wonder why you ever did it any other way. Anybody have any questions in specific? Yeah.
Can this actually be used to fix some of the themes like Omega, or some of the base themes that really don't look right under IE at all?
When you say fix, like just fix some of their issues?
Fix or improve the CSS that's in that theme that really fails under IE.
Not necessarily. I mean, you still have to write your own CSS, so you'd have to still write the fixes for IE or any other problems that you have. But it can give you.
it's just helpful if you can utilize it. You still have to write the fixes. I mean, so if it's not written that way to start, then this is just can help you speed it up because it already has.
I mean, there is, like I said, like Zen has a feature that will fix some of the CSS compatibility issues in like IE6 and 7. That's like it's a basically an include mix-in sort of thing that runs that you can enable or disable that'll fix some of that sort of stuff. But that's again just basically like a template that's already been written that what it does is like adds a certain class to every to every CSS class that you tell it to, and it'll add that to it to help fix IE, which is it rather than doing the CSS hacks, to fix IE 6, 7, 8 with the 0 or the backslash, whatever it was that would fix them, that it does that in CSS. So does that make any sense? I felt like I was
Well, and at least you could write like your own mixin to do these fixes, and so you have that mixin in your own library. So now you can just include it in your next project if you need to. So that makes it easy to kind of do those sorts of
it's
things.
essentially just reusable CSS is what like Compass and a lot of these are.
I just had a quick question about the arguments. Is it Compass specific, or is that a SAS feature? How you can?
No, arguments are SAS. You can do them in SAS itself.
But the required and the optional ones wrapped in brackets. That's just a SAS thing.
But yeah, this is because
Complicated.
this is a little complicated because this is
It's not
like
showing you what I actually would write. It's
yeah, this is more like
it's covering everything you can possibly do.
yeah,
So-
it's like everything that you could put onto the font. This specifically is covering everything you could put on a font face selector the line in CSS. So it's like
It is
font.
SAS specific. It's not necessarily Compass specific. 'Cause
No.
They've defined some of those variables as like optional, and they give you like sensible defaults.
Yeah, so a lot of it is optional. I mean, and you don't have to use the variables if you don't want to. Font face is probably not a good example, but certain other things like borders or whatever, you can define it as you need to. But there are some that are optional. I mean, obviously you have to put, for a font face, you have to put the name of the font. That's a required one. But everything else would be, the weight and the size and all that stuff would be optional. Anybody else? Questions?
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you guys for bearing with us since we weren't prepared to do this again, but if you have any questions, sass-lang.com and compass-style.org has a lot of good stuff. And I'm at Hot Sauce Design on Twitter, and you're
At Dustin J. Cooper.
on Twitter. So feel free to ping us, and we'll be glad to help out.
There's no true what we can do.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.